You'd think by now every Pokemon game in existence would be fully dissected with all of its secrets documented, especially ones that came out over 2 decades ago, like Pokemon Pinball, Ruby and Sapphire. But this Game Boy Advance title from 2003 might have some of the most inconsistent and misunderstood game mechanics of anything I've ever tried to research. Even trying to look up simple questions like, where do certain Pokemon spawn? What is the percentage chance of a rare spawn? Are those secret Johto starters actually e-reader exclusives, or is there some other secret method buried in the code that gives you access to them? These searches will have you scrolling past all sorts of misinformation from outdated game FAQs, dusty old forum posts, until finally you realize nobody seems to know for sure how this game actually works. I think with modern games, we just expect that data miners can just take a peek into the game's files and provide us with definitive answers, but this was the early 2000s. There was no human readable code in these games to even peek at. Open the raw data of any game cart from this era, and this is what you'll see, just a dense mass of compiled machine code designed to run as efficiently as possible, but not designed to be readable. And while the process of decompiling games has gotten more popular in recent years, it is a slow and arduous task, usually reserved for the titans like Mario 64. It's rare for spin-off games like Pokemon Pinball to have dedicated decompilation projects because the demand usually isn't as high. But to my surprise, there is a project for this game that started back in 2018. The only problem is, it's only about 20% complete. This is a story of discovery, dead ends, and debunking information about what I think is one of the greatest pinball games of all time, with one awkwardly worded Pokédex entry in particular sitting at the center of decades of misinformation. And this video isn't just about my journey or all the volunteer engineers in the Discord and the real work that they're doing. I also want this to be a resource for new or weary pinballers. This is a deep analysis of the code that makes the game tick, including some parts that we still have yet to understand. And if all you want is a better understanding of the game itself, feel free to jump straight to that section of the video using the timestamps. For everyone else who maybe haven't played this game before, I'm going to unravel this mystery for you the same way that I experienced it. It all started with this stream that I did back in June 16th, 2024. Whoa, dude, the graphic, ooh, this game's like really pretty. Look at the reflection of the clouds in that puddle, like this is fancy. So this was my first time ever seeing or touching this game, and it took me a while to get around to it despite many recommendations, the first of which came from Bandy, thank you, because I never really liked pinball games as a kid. I always found them to be too difficult. I never really liked the focus on high score gameplay. But even just playing this game for one session, 2 things became clear very quickly. 1, people love this game. Was I the only person that didn't play these? It's crazy. Everyone's coming in like, oh my god! And 2, it's not like any pinball game I've ever played. I did not expect there to be boss fights in this game. It's like whoever made this had an itemized list of every issue I personally had with pinball games and then just perfectly addressed each one of them. Like, oh, you don't like high score gameplay? Well, how about filling out a Pokédex instead? Oh, you think pinball is too hard? Well, we'll slow down the ball speed a little bit and you can keep your dex progress between runs. It's boring just playing on one game board. Here's 2 different boards with their own unique Pokemon spawns, mini games, and boss fights to break up the monotony. And this gameplay loop is not just addicting to play, it's also mesmerizing to watch. The way the camera smoothly tracks the Pokeball as it moves up and down the board, which is such a huge improvement over the flickering ball screen transition that existed in the Game Boy version of Pokemon Pinball, which happened to be produced by the same company, Jupiter. It definitely explains why the Ruby and Sapphire sequel feels so polished, because they've done all this stuff before and now they're just doing it better. Like, just look at the way that the ball rotates in a way that looks surprisingly 3D despite the game being rendered entirely in 2D pixel art. And it is gorgeous pixel art. Every Pokemon sprite, Pokédex portrait, animation, and background art are all custom drawn and unique to this game. I don't think I recognized a single asset that was copy and pasted from any of the mainline games, except maybe some of the iconic Gen 3 music tracks. But don't be deceived by the game's friendly and approachable appearance, because there is still a very steep learning curve here. You're not just having to learn proper flipper etiquette and how to aim and cup your balls. There's also all these other game mechanics you have to figure out, like egg hatching, evolution, traveling between biomes, hunting super rare spawns like Latios and Latias. So you can probably see how what was supposed to be a simple one-off stream quickly snowballed into an obsession, not just for me, but for my audience too. And as those days turned to weeks of streams, I was relying more and more on my chat to kind of guide me through the experience. But this is also where the first issues started, because as useful as the pro tips and tricks were, there were also a lot of myths and rumors getting mixed into the conversation. As we narrowed down the remaining Pokemon in the decks and had to hunt for specific spawns, I was starting to receive a lot of conflicting information. I would ask the chat, hey, we haven't caught a Kecleon yet, where does he spawn? And someone would say, oh, I looked it up, he's in the plains. And then we would spend hours grinding on the plains, only for someone else to show up and say, oh, you're looking for Kecleon? No, yeah, he's in the forest. And this happened a few more times with some other Pokemon, but ultimately wasn't a huge deal. I mean, we were all still enjoying the game. I wasn't in a huge rush. If I really had to, I could go look up some of this information myself. But then someone asked, hey, are you gonna hunt those secret Johto starters once you finish the Pokedex? Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but this was the moment where we had officially crossed into the event horizon. The next 6 months of my life were about to be consumed by a mysterious pinball-sized black hole. And these are the 4 Pokemon central to this mystery: Chikorita, Cyndaquil, Totodile, and Aerodactyl, all of which do appear as cameos on the Ruby board during regular gameplay, but aren't normally catchable anywhere else in the game. And the more I asked people about how to get them, the more confused I became, hearing everything from, oh, they're just extremely rare, to they won't appear until you finish the whole Pokedex first, to actually you can only get them with e-reader cards, and my personal favorite, oh, by the way, they only spawn on the Ruby board. And sure enough, even after taking the research into my own hands, I turned up similar results. Nobody online seemed to understand exactly how these super rare Pokemon worked, and the only absolute certainty, as far as I could tell, was that this set of promotional e-reader cards, distributed only from Japanese Pokemon centers for a limited time, and only scannable using a Japanese e-reader plus, was the only surefire method of forcing these special appearance Pokemon to spawn in the game. But what about all those other methods that I was hearing from my chat? Has someone out there actually seen one of these Pokemon without using an e-reader card? Now, it's important to note here that each of these promotional Pokemon's dex entries says the exact same thing: bonus appearance on Ruby Field. And a quick search of all the usually dependable sources for retro games like Game FAQs, NeoSeeker, Bulbapedia, and Serebii all seem to define this Pokedex entry literally, aka these bonus Pokemon only appear on the Ruby board. But things start to get murky when it comes to actually explaining how to get them to appear. The most common claim is that these Pokemon are simply extremely rare, with a few guides lumping them into the same spawn pool as Latios and Latias, which have a spawn rate of 1%. Bulbapedia claims that the rate is less than 1%, but does not explain how they arrived at that answer. This Game FAQ guide from 2006 claims that you need to catch 150 Pokemon before you can even have a chance at them spawning, and this guide from 2005 by Cosine Lol does finally mention the role of the Japanese e-reader cards, but incorrectly states that the function of the card is to simply boost the appearance rate. Now, it's possible that the author of this guide sourced this specific piece of info from this specific Serebii page about Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire posted not long after the game launched in 2003. The page also contains the vague and unhelpful statement that bonus appearance on Ruby Field means, quote, it is found basically randomly and rarely on the Ruby board. This is followed by the anecdotal statement that he found Totodile in a cave. I even reached out to Serebii personally to see if he could confirm whether he did use the card or not, but never got a response. What I could do, however, was scrutinize the quality of his other information. And there is so much more wrong on this website than just that single page on the Johto starters. And I'm sure Serebii has plenty of other better things to concern himself with than fact-checking pages he wrote over 2 decades ago. But the fact is, these pages are still some of the highest results when you search for info about this game, and Serebii has generally been a reliable resource for other mainline Pokemon games, which is probably why my chat was reading from these pages when I originally wasted hours and hours on stream hunting in the wrong biomes, because turns out a large portion of the spawn location entries are just wrong. wrong. Kecleon does not spawn in the plains, Magikarp does not spawn in the lake, Volbeat and Illumise are almost right, they're in the right biomes, but they're listed on the wrong boards, and so on and so on. But the worst offender of all has to be this page describing the e-reader cards. Not only is it missing the bonus stage card, which gives you access to a hidden stage select screen, every single one of these card descriptions is just incorrect. Well, except for the Jirachi card. Technically, it is true that with this card, you can get moved to the place of Jirachi more times as well as bonuses being more frequent. Yeah, that made sense, right? And again, it's surprisingly hard to find any other info about these cards in English. Serebii's page is almost always the first result, but after digging a little bit, I was able to find an eBay listing for these unofficial reprints that do seem to have the full details for each card's function. And I won't read each one here, but here's a side-by-side so you can get a sense of just how wrong Serebii was here. So it seems safe to assume that he was probably wrong about the Johto starters as well, but with no way to confirm anything, I just proceeded to play the game myself, and maybe I could find some of my own evidence. And it wasn't long before I had finished the base Pokedex. I did not see a single Johto starter, and so decided to go through the process of testing the e-reader cards myself with an emulator using Japanese copies of both the game and the e-reader plus. Shout out to this video by Racing Chew that outlines this whole process. This is the single e-reader card that you need to get each of these 4 spawns. It's also a surprisingly tedious process to do this. You scan the card once, start a game, your first spawn will be one of those 4 Pokemon you're missing, and rinse and repeat this process 4 times to catch all 4 Pokemon. And yeah, this worked, but this was also not how I expected this to work, considering the amount of people that claim that these Pokemon have extremely low spawn rates and that the e-reader card is only supposed to boost these rates, not set them to 100%. So getting all 4 back-to-back guaranteed was kind of anticlimactic and just felt wrong. It also made me think maybe there is a hard way to do this, like people were claiming. So the next phase of my testing was to trade this Pokedex data from this Japanese copy of the game to a fresh US copy. And this process, according to the game's manual, increases the chances of encountering Pokemon that the receiving player is missing, marking them as seen but not caught. And now I should be able to encounter them assuming the right conditions are met. And by playing this on a fresh save, we can confirm several different things at once. In particular, will one appear before I finish the Pokedex? Will they all immediately appear after I hit the requirements, or are we going to have to hunt them down one at a time with super rare spawn rates? At this point, I had been streaming the game for a few months, 3 to 4 times a week, and starting from a fresh save ended up being a lot harder than I expected. And while it ended up being a good thing for the sake of the test, since I got to go through hundreds of spawn checks to see if something might appear earlier than it was supposed to, I was also struggling to find even a single super rare legendary spawn at all. According to Racing Chew's video, catching Latios is a requirement to get the e-reader Pokemon to spawn, but neither Latios or Latias will appear unless you have at least 100 Pokemon in your Pokedex. So I figured I would start my grind on the Sapphire board to get all those exclusives first, just in case we do need a full Pokedex, but also because everybody was telling me that these Johto starters are only on the Ruby board, so I expected to get stuck there permanently once I actually hit the requirements. And the irony of all this is that I kind of ended up getting stuck on the Sapphire board instead, because while it didn't take long to hit 100 Pokemon, I could not get Latias to appear. And it didn't make sense to leave the board until I had everything from it. And I also wasn't sure that Racing Chew was correct that only Latios would lead to the Johto starter spawning. What if catching Latias does the same thing? Can you tell I've developed trust issues with any information about this game from anywhere? And as the days went by of hunting these legendaries, talking to chat, rolling different possibilities around in my head, I couldn't help but keep thinking about what Serebii said about finding that Totodile in a cave. And while there really was no evidence to believe that this was still possible, it turns out Serebii was not the only one claiming to have seen these Pokemon with some alternate method. There was another thread on Serebii's forums from 2016 where the user Comet Starlight responded to a question about the e-reader card, saying, "I've gotten Chikorita before. The Johto starters exist in the English cartridge, but the card you speak of increases the player's chances of them appearing." And right off the bat, we have some of the same wrong info being one-sided, which we saw before, which tells me that Comet Starlight is either confused or just straight up lying here. But it's what Luster Purge, the OP of this thread, said next that really made me pause. That's great news! I guess I'll keep trying on Ruby Board for a while longer. The completionist in me refuses to let the game go until everything is caught. Ooh, yeah, right, you felt that, and maybe you're not a completionist, but for me, Pokemon games are all about collecting everything, and it cuts to the core of why I'm even making this video, because it has always bothered me on a deep level that Pokemon games do this. They sell you on the concept of catching them all, and then arbitrarily cut you off at the 99% completion point by locking a legendary or two behind some limited time event or promotion, and effectively making it impossible for new players that are going back to explore old games to ever have any chance of completing their collection on their own. Now, at least with the mainline games, it's well documented which Pokemon are and aren't available anymore, but Pokemon Pinball is a different story. The only saving grace is that they do hide these promotional Pokemon from the Pokedex. Like, you can still finish the game, finish the dex that is there, and they will celebrate it. They will tell you you hit 100%, but the problem is the internet exists, and as long as there are blurry screenshots of Pokemon that I do not have that seem to exist in every language version of the game, there will always be completionists like me, like Luster Purge, that will be pulling their hair out over it. Comet Star responded to Luster Purge's hopeful message saying, "Good luck, they're among some of the rarest appearances on the board, so it's reasonable that they haven't shown up till this point." And as much as I hate to admit it, I really wanted to believe this logic. Even if he's lying about his Chikorita, is it possible that the requirements and spawn rates to catch these super rare Pokemon are just so insurmountable that it's simply the case that nobody has played long enough to find one and document it yet? And this all aligned with what I had been hearing from my chat for months, which is that, oh, I never finished this game, it was too hard, I never even saw Rayquaza, I didn't finish the Pokedex, and even if they did, how many of those people would still keep playing the game after they hit 100%? How are they supposed to know that the game is hiding another 4 secret Pokemon from them? The final exchange between Luster and Comet was, funny enough, them also pointing out that Serebii's info pages on this game seem to be very wrong. Luster also asks Comet if he still has his game cartridge, which I think might have been a veiled attempt to solicit actual receipts that the Chikorita he caught was real, but of course Comet ignores that question in his final response and then just disappears. Over a year later in 2017, 2 more weary pinballers wander into the thread, demanding proof from Comet Starlight, both stating that they've been playing the game well past 100% dex completion and have seen nothing but duplicate Latios and Latios spawns. Rig signs off saying, "If someone does claim to have any of these, they need to post a YouTube video or something." After trying and failing for weeks, it finally happened. I got Latios on the Sapphire board. Oh! Guys! Which meant I could finally switch to the Ruby board and start the next phase of the hunt. And while the hundreds and hundreds of catches that it took to get to this point are just a drop in the bucket when it comes to like testing probabilities, it did feel like soft confirmation that these starters were not going to appear until we met certain conditions. And now it was just a question of, is Latios enough? Are we going to see a starter appear on the way to farming Latios? And once again, another few weeks went by with nothing to show for it. It was around this time that one of my viewers, Missing Noglick, I think I'll just call him Missing No, said he had new information about the game that he had found in the Pret Discord, a community of fans that were actively reverse engineering the mainline and spin-off Pokemon games. And as stated before, this process of decompilation is highly technical and time-consuming and involves translating the game's raw code to human-readable code, which is what lets us see the exact functions and probabilities that the game is using to handle things like spawn rates and other hidden mechanics. Now, you'd think I would immediately jump into this Discord myself and start digging through it, but Missing No had already done the work for me. He had asked questions and come away with 2 major confirmations that, to be honest, I don't think I was really ready to hear. The first was that the Johto starters in Aerodactyl do in fact have a 1% chance of spawning once they are unlocked, the same as Latios and Latias. And secondly, and most unsurprisingly, the game's code shows no other way to encounter these super rare Pokemon without the use of the e-reader promo card. Reading this message hit me in a couple different ways, because on one hand I was disappointed even though all signs have pointed to this being true. I was still holding out hope that maybe there was some slim chance of an alternative method to getting them. And while I should have also felt a little bit of relief to finally have this answered, to be honest, I think I was more in denial than anything. I wasn't ready to be relieved about anything yet. I still hadn't even caught Latios, much less my first Johto starter. And this information didn't change anything about my current goal. It just dashed my hopes that a bigger hunt might exist beyond it. And even so, I still hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes. I was taking Missing No at his word. I was trusting that the devs were doing a thorough and accurate job of the decompilation. I didn't even know at this point that the project wasn't even finished. All I knew for sure is that as soon as I went into this Discord myself, that there would be no going back. So I just went back to streaming. I didn't make any big announcement about the info I had received, since technically it had no impact on our current goal of just catching the starters the normal way, and we'd already kind of assumed that the spawn rates would be 1% like the legendaries, so that was nice to have confirmed, but also a little terrifying considering how long we've been hunting Latios with no progress, how long it took to find Latias. Are we really gonna have to do this for 4 more Pokemon? But before I even had time to really worry about any of that, our drought of progress ended. Oh no, oh no, we don't have any lives. Okay. Guys, that's Latios. that's Latios. Alright. Okay. Oh my god, finally. Please just give it to me.
Everyone shut up and let him lock in.
Yeah, everybody shut up. Okay. Okay. Sorry. No, we're good. We're good. We're not done. It just... Now we can start hunting the Johto starters. Finally. And you know that saying, when it rains, it pours? Because the very next stream after catching Latios, this happened. Collecting the... Oh! Did you guys see that? Did you see that? Okay. Listen. We, Sorry, I had to message Bandy, because I know she literally just left. Okay, listen. All right, listen. We have 0 lives, and I'm not saying you guys have 0 lives. I mean,
Lock in.
We've been hunting this for months, but like that's not what I mean. I mean, I don't want to mess this up, dude. I'm actually nervous. I can't even speak. Oh, okay. There he is. There he is! We're doing it right now. Oh, we got him. That's the first actual Johto starter in an English copy of the game that I've ever seen. I don't know what the appearance rate is, but the fact that we got one on the 2nd day, very encouraging. And while I was definitely suspicious with how quickly we were able to find our very first starter right after catching Latios, I was also finally starting to feel that relief that I was lacking earlier. I had no idea if getting the rest of the Pokemon would be as easy as Cyndaquil. That could have just been insane luck. But it was such a major milestone to finally have at least one of these Pokemon that I really wasn't in a rush to try to get the other 3. I was bracing myself for a very long hunt. But then, of course, just a few streams later... What's that? Oh my god! No, we get it. Well, who's that Pokemon, chat? Who's that Pokemon? I was like, this is gonna suck if I get this with 0 lives. It's okay though, we have Ball Saber, it's okay. Ah! Oh. Alright, I need to lock in. Everybody, no distractions, everybody shut up. Oof, make something blue for Totodile. I don't know, I'll think about it. Oh. And there it is. And the fact that I almost ended too. Not Chikorita. I think somebody predicted Chikorita would be next. Nope. Alright, so... Interesting. The order of this seems pretty random. Like, when we used the e-reader cards in the Japanese version, it gave us everything in order from, like, Chikorita to Aerodactyl, pretty much. And we were now halfway through catching all of the e-reader exclusives, which made this the perfect checkpoint to finally test one of the biggest myths of all. do these Pokemon really just spawn on the Ruby board? Or can you also get them on the Sapphire board? Because there is this singular speedrunning website that claims that the spawns can appear on either board, but at this point I'd never seen any evidence of that being the case. No videos, no screenshots, so it could be wrong, just like everything else on the internet about this game is wrong. But I needed to know, I needed to prove Serebii wrong. And sure enough, during one of my first attempts on the Sapphire board, just days after we caught the last starter, this happened. What? Excuse me? Okay. Okay, I gotta move quick. We gotta move quick because I have no lives again. Every single time this happens. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This
Surprise
is... Sorry.
Time.
I need to explain why this is important. So this is not just the last Johto starter. This is a Johto starter on the Sapphire board, which according to the internet is not possible in most places, except for that one website that says that you can do that. My dad is calling me to congratulate me on catching a Chikorita. And there you have it. One of the biggest myths about this game finally debunked. And if there is other footage out there showing these starters spawning on the Sapphire board, I sure wasn't able to find any. But how did this rumor become so common? Why were people so confident that these were Ruby board only spawns? Was the awkward wording of this Pokedex entry bonus appearance on Ruby Field some kind of mistake? I don't actually think so. I think everyone just misinterpreted what bonus appearance actually means. Because if we look at the text in the Japanese version, it's very similar, but there's one important difference. Tokubetsu Shutsuen translates to special appearance. And I think the choice to translate this as bonus appearance conveys a slightly different idea, like these Pokemon are somehow a bonus that can be earned from the Ruby board. And another way to think of a special appearance would be something like a cameo, aka all this Dex entry was ever saying is that, hey, these 4 Pokemon literally make special appearances on the Ruby board. That's it. You have Chikorita sitting here, Cyndaquil hangs out near the egg, both Totodile and Aerodactyl take turns replacing the egg spawn. Like, this is just a Pokedex entry stating a fact about these Pokemon. It's not a hint on how to catch them, which wouldn't even make sense since you can't see this text until after you have them in your decks anyway. If they did want this to be a hint, it should have said something like, only obtainable by using extremely time-limited and region-exclusive promotional e-reader cards. And that would have saved everyone a hell of a lot of time. And coincidentally, this Chikorita catch was the last stream I was able to do in this setup because a certain Mercane Hilton was at our doorstep in Florida and I had to move some of my equipment to a safer area. And then not even 2 days later, doing my first pinball stream from this new location, that just reset the game. Is that it? Are we actually done? And that was it. The last of the 4 e-reader Pokemon were finally caught. I wish we could name it Milton, yeah. That's unbelievable. I'm not the first person to do it, but I'm the first one to do it on this board. Dude, when did we start this? I think it took us longer to catch Latios than it did to actually hunt all the starters. Oh, that's my sister. She's locked out. And it felt good to be finished, but I knew this was just a formality at this point. Achieving a true 100% dex with event exclusives the hard way doesn't actually give us any new information we didn't already have. Was this truly the only way to encounter these Pokemon? Why did Latios and Latias take so long to find while the starters seem to show up relatively quickly? Like, aren't all of these supposed to be in the same category of super rare Pokemon with a base spawn rate of 1%? What is the actual math behind the functions and probabilities driving this game? I was finally ready to get the concrete answers. It was finally time to enter the Pret Discord. The decompilation project for Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire officially began in 2018, sitting alongside several other side game channels like Pokemon TCG and Pokemon Stadium. If you look in the Poke Pinball RS channel, you'll see that most recent efforts on the game have been led by WhenGryphonsFly, who only joined the project in early 2023. Griffin, like many others in here, came seeking answers to the Johto starter mystery after he watched a 100% speedrun of the game that excluded them because they were allegedly allegedly event exclusive. I ended up scrolling through the entire message history of this channel. I loved seeing each step of the discovery process, massive breakthroughs followed by months of halted progress. New faces coming and going while veterans of the Discord try to steer newcomers in the right direction, although most of them just pop in occasionally to cheer from the sidelines. It's very common for these devs to be active with multiple projects at once. A roadblock in one channel might be overcome by a discovery made on another project. Some of these channels can be dead for months or even years before the right person with the right amount of boredom and determination comes along to relight the torch. I found this entire community to be fascinating the more I looked into it, but I'm going to stick to just looking at the history of the Pokemon Pinball RS channel. If you want to use timestamps to skip right to the deep dive of the known mechanics, feel free to do that, but I highly recommend coming along for the full story of this channel because I think you'll be surprised how chaotic and sometimes humorous the development of these projects can be. The Poke Pinball RS channel was kicked off by user ShantyTown in mid-October of 2018. He starts off by sharing some humorous hand-drawn placeholder assets that he found in the game and notes that the internal code structure looks very similar to Jupiter's previous title, Pokemon Pinball for the Game Boy. And ShantyTown would know this because he led the charge on the disassembly project for this game, as well as used it to create a mod that adds the entirety of Gen 2 to its Pokedex. Shanty started work on the title screen first, quickly discovering how to access a hidden e-reader screen by alternating the L and R buttons 6 times while holding right on the D-pad, remarking that it's unclear how the player was supposed to know this. Another user, Sato Mew-chan, found the European version of this screen also existed, despite the e-reader never getting a European release. This exchange between ShantyTown and Revo shows them troubleshooting the catch mode Pokemon code and was the last actual progress update for the rest of that year. Except one notable member that snuck in right before the year ended. This is Cam the Saxman, creator of the Eon Flute mod, and he was here not to contribute code, but just to flex his 20 billion score, reminding everyone that the Sapphire table is way easier than the Ruby table, which is true, by the way. Being able to snipe the slot spins with Zigzagoon is very broken. 2019 wasn't much better. It took almost 8 months before the channel showed any signs of life until Cam the Saxman returned again, this time with a GitHub update. This revived the project for a couple weeks as Revo and Cam tried to work out the game's save system, but they hit another snag matching this code, and Cam blamed the compiler that they'd been using, and then he fully dipped for the rest of the year. We are now in July of 2020, 6 months since the last update. The silence being broken this time by John Game Freak, saying he needs this repo, so I guess I gotta fix it up, and he proceeds to work on tools for a few weeks, but otherwise not much else happens. A few months go by, Revo shows up again to report that a major discovery was made by Cam the Saxman while working on the Link to the Past decomp project. One of the compilers they had ruled out turned out to have been useful after all, and so it might help them here. This brings back some other familiar faces as they discuss things, but ultimately, nothing gets confirmed and the channel dies again for another 8 months. On July 22nd, 2021, user The Spirit of Pikalax posts a GitHub pull request, and Sam the Saxman loves to see it. Not long after, newcomer Narks appears and asks for guidance on setting up the repository. Pikalax is happy to help, but after Narks asks why he can't edit the Pokedex descriptions and species, I assume he was looking for a way to add new Pokemon to the game, Pikalax has to break the bad news that those have not been disassembled yet, and silence falls over the channel again for the rest of the year. Cut to next year, February 2022, and a new contributor, Pizdex, posts a single function that they were able to match. And that was the only progress this project saw for the entire rest of 2022. Good job, Pizdex. Every little bit helps. Now, an entire year straight of inactivity might make anyone think a project is dead in the water, especially the mods of the pret Discord, who at this point had already moved the Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire project into the dreaded inactive section. But on February 19th, 2023, a new pull request appeared from user WhenGryphonsFly, and this marked a major turning point for the project. His grind throughout 2023 was shockingly consistent compared to the short-lived sprints of all our previous characters, many of whom made special appearances again, stirred up by this new uptick in activity. It's also at this point where there's honestly too many updates to even cover in this video, but one line in particular jumped out at me, where Griffin states, "I'm particularly interested in gmain.unc7, which, if set, allows the Johto starters plus Aerodactyl to appear without Pokedex entries." Reading this sparked a hope in me that I thought I had already crushed. Is it possible that there could still be another way to get these Pokemon? But this was still only May of 2023. I figured this would get touched on or debunked later on, so I just kept scrolling. I watched as the completion percentage as reported by this automated OK bot ticked up and up into the new year until August 12th, 2024, when Griffin celebrated a major milestone. The total amount of code decompiled from Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire had reached 20%. And as if on cue, the very next message in that channel was from a user named Missing, who turned out to be Missing No from earlier, the viewer that had DM'd me before about this Discord. And it was surreal scrolling through his conversations with Griffin, realizing, oh yeah, no, I'm at the present day now. I'm watching Missing No ask all the questions that have been hunting me and the chat through all these streams over the past few months, and here's Griffin pointing directly at the code that's handling all this stuff, about to give us a final human readable answer. And here it is. As you can see, Aerodactyl, Chikorita, Totodile, and Cyndaquil are listed here alongside the other super rare spawns, Latios and Latias. This confirms at a glance what was already pretty well assumed, which is that the exclusive Pokemon share the same 1% spawn rate as the legendaries, which means Bulbapedia technically wasn't wrong to say that the chance of any one of these Pokemon appearing is technically less than 1%. But of course, there's all these other checks up here, which Griffin breaks down one line at a time. The first is an e-reader card check, but not for the one you might think. This is a different e-reader card labeled Encounter Rate Up, which effectively doubles the odds of encountering a super rare Pokemon. Instead of rolling a random number between 0 and 99, that's where the 1% chance comes from, it rolls a random number from 0 to 49, bringing that up to 2% or double the chances. This bonus can also be activated without an e-reader card if a player clears the Rayquaza bonus round at least once during a run. There's also this line here that checks if you have at least 100 Pokemon registered in your Pokedex, another requirement for a super rare Pokemon to spawn. After the check to see if we have rolled a 0, we also have this check to see if we have caught or evolved at least 5 Pokemon during the current run. But wait, what's that on the other side of this OR operator? This is where we're reminded that this decompilation is not fully finished, as Griffin explains that he's not quite sure what the UNC12B part is, but that it can bypass all the other checks if enabled. Could be slots, could be a debug feature, not sure. This, of course, gave me major pause. I had to check if this was the same unknown factor pointed out from earlier in the channel, but no, that was for code labeled gmain.unc7. Before I even had a chance to wildly speculate and get my hopes up, Griffin pulls out the final nail in the coffin, pointing out that regardless of what the variable UNC12B actually does, what really matters here are these 4 if statements that precede each of the exclusive Pokemon. These are the enforcement checks that are separating the Johto starters and Aerodactyl from the rest of the game. And what is this code doing? It's checking to see if you have these Pokemon in your Pokedex already, and if you don't, they will not spawn. AKA, you cannot catch these Pokemon without trading with someone who has already caught these Pokemon. And the only people that could have caught these Pokemon are the ones who visited a special promotional kiosk in a Japanese Pokemon Center and had access to this specific e-reader card, which, by the way, here's the code for how that system works. Sitting at the top of all the other code we just looked at, if you use this special guest's card, it just skips everything we went over and immediately gives you one of the 4 Pokemon you're missing, guaranteed. So I guess that's that. After decades of misinformation, we finally know the one true way to catch the Johto starters and Aerodactyl. We learned you have to use the e-reader card or trade with someone who did. We learned that they share the same 1% spawn pool with Latios and Latias, and we confirmed that they can in fact spawn on either board, meaning that we can finally put all these mysteries to bed. Or can we? Did you really think we were gonna just ignore the mysterious functions that Griffin couldn't explain? What about the fact that at the time of making this video, only roughly 20% of the game's total code has been decompiled, and that's not even including symbols and other data, which puts the total percentage completion closer to 17%. Even with the evidence staring at me in the face, I had to ask Griffin what the chances were that there were still some other method of obtaining these Johto starters hiding in the remaining code. And he essentially responded with, extremely unlikely. He explained that the first mystery, gmain.unc7, turned out to just be the special guest's e-reader card. And the second mystery, figuring out what sets Unc12B for the e-reader spawns and Unc12C for the Pichu hatch, remains unsolved. He finishes saying, if there is a hidden mechanic, it would have to be one that sets Unc12B or C, but as I stated in the GitHub document, it is extremely unlikely that such a mechanic exists. And this is the GitHub document he is referring to, which contains an exhaustive description of all the probabilities and spawn mechanics in the game. We only covered the super rare spawns in detail so far, but there are a few other oddities worth knowing if you want to try 100%ing the Pokedex in this game. The first is how to increase your odds of encountering a super rare Pokemon. As stated before, it's not possible to even see one of these spawns before you have at least 100 Pokemon registered in your Pokedex, and the initial spawn rate is set to 1%. If you manage to beat Rayquaza the first time, you activate a hidden value referred to as the Rayquaza trigger or Rayquaza flag. This doubles the odds of encountering a super rare Pokemon from 1 to 2%, and this flag will remain on even if you start a new game, change boards, or soft reset the console. You can also activate this flag by scanning the encounter rate up card, and the only way to turn it off completely is by powering off the console. But this flag also affects one other rare Pokemon in an unexpected way. Pichu. Meant to be the hardest Pokemon to hatch, Pichu's spawn rate actually functions in reverse to the other super rare spawns, starting at 2% on a fresh save and getting bumped down to 1% after the Rayquaza flag is set. This is thought to be a bug or oversight in the code because it doesn't really make sense why the game would punish you for playing well, but keep this in mind if the last Pokemon you need to hatch is Pichu. Do not beat Rayquaza or you're just making it harder for yourself. And in case you were wondering, wait, how does the game decide which super rare Pokemon to spawn if there are multiple available? Well, this only ever applies when the e-reader exclusives are present, because normally the choice between Latios and Latias is decided by the board. But with 4 extra Pokemon added to the list, you might assume it just pulls one at random, but it turns out this is only true if you've already caught every single super rare spawn, because the way the game actually works the first time around is very simple. It just goes through the list of Pokemon in sequential order, and if you already have that Pokemon caught, it keeps going until it lands on one that you are missing. AKA, you are guaranteed to get a Pokemon you are missing every time, and it will always be in the same order, as confirmed through my own experience where Cyndaquil was my first catch and Aerodactyl was my last. This also means that if you're hunting for these Pokemon at full odds, aka traded Pokedex data, and not using the e-reader cards directly, Aerodactyl is technically the hardest Pokemon in the game to get, requiring you to catch every other super rare 1% in that pool before you can even reach him. It is only after you have all these Pokemon caught and registered that the game will start to serve you duplicates at random. At least we think so. I kept playing after I caught Aerodactyl, and it took a long time, but my next super rare spawn after that was Latios, so it seemed to go back to the top of the list, or it was just chance. Quick update, I also caught a Latias while editing this video, but still no duplicate starter spawns, so if anyone else can confirm that, let me know. From here, the spawn mechanics are pretty straightforward. If the RNG fails the 1% check for a super rare spawn, the game deploys an algorithm that assigns a weight to all the possible spawns in the current biome. These spawns are categorized as either common or rare spawns, and each category gets its own rules for weight calculation. Generally speaking, a Pokemon with lower weight will be harder to find. There are only 9 Pokemon considered rare. Their weight can be boosted by the presence of the Rayquaza flag, just like the super rare Pokemon. Common Pokemon are not affected by this. Instead, they uniquely can lose a lot of their weight if their entire evolution line is already registered in the Pokedex. In other words, by catching and fully evolving common Pokemon, you make the other Pokemon you are missing more likely to appear. The game adds all these weights together, making the probability that any given Pokemon will appear simply a function of their assigned weight divided by the total weight of all the Pokemon. These spawns are also determined by whether you have 2 or 3 get arrows lit before you trigger the catch mode, since some of these Pokemon are exclusive to one or the other. Egg hatches use essentially the same system aside from Pichu and Oddish. Pichu, as mentioned, is treated like a super rare spawn, and Oddish simply ignores its base family evolutions and generates its weight instead based on its board-specific evolution. And that is the full truth behind the mysterious spawn mechanics of Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. At least it's all the truth we have access to right now. I'm still a little suspicious about how quickly I managed to find all of the Johto starters in Aerodactyl. Like, I've hunted Latios and Latias a few times now, and even with that 2% boosted spawn rate with the Rayquaza flag, it still takes a while to get even one of them, much less getting multiple back-to-back. Now, my first thought went to how the manual states that traded Pokedex data does boost the appearance rate for Pokemon that you're missing, but according to Griffin, that code does not apply to these super rare Pokemon. But it was nice to finally see what the manual meant by higher rate. So big thanks to Griffin for all his hard work and taking the time to write up all this detailed documentation, something that this community has been sorely needing for decades. I'll include links below where you can follow and support Griffin's future endeavors, including a speed choice ROM hack he made for the game that I highly recommend checking out if you're interested in doing a 100% Pokedex speedrun. This hack fixes the weird Pichu spawn rate behavior related to the Rayquaza trigger, it prevents duplicate spawns in most cases, and it drastically reduces a lot of the repeated actions needed to catch, hatch, and evolve Pokemon. And of course, shout out to the entire Pret Discord for all the hard work that they do in their spare time for these projects. And if you have the skills and would like to assist in some Pokemon decompilation yourselves, I'll include the links to the Pret resource page below. Decomps are insanely hard work, but unlock so much potential to fully understand and build on top of the games we love. The disassembly of the original Pokemon Pinball by ShantyTown is a great example of this. His Pokemon Pinball Generations mod adds 2 new stages for Gold and Silver, and 100 new Pokemon with custom art assets to match the style of the original game. And I highly recommend checking out this article on his blog for a behind-the-scenes look. I'm sure I'm not the only person that would be thrilled to see an active mod community for Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire if they can finish this decomp project. And speaking of active communities, I want to thank everyone who has joined me during these streams over this past year. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that our community grew 10 times over just through Pokemon Pinball streams alone. You guys made this entire process not just a lot more fun and entertaining, but also made it possible to begin with. Without your subs and donations, I would have never been able to justify spending the hundreds of hours it's taken to stream, research, write, and edit this video. Shout out to Allegra and Vice in particular, who went above and beyond the call of duty, and in no particular order. I also want to thank Loki, Yikes It's Mike, Miley, the homie Gabe, Abs, Mommy Mango, OG Slender, Josh, Feffy, Yankee, Mr. Saturn, Gia, Catastrophia, Handyman, Kenzie, Aaron, Michael, Paige, Blitz, Lizzie, Sheep, MDK, Frost, Moog, Lugio, Mr. Oof, MK, Nox, Incubus, Q, Anime-kun, Django, Baron, H from YouTube, all you dedicated lurkers out there across various platforms, and many, many more. Oh, and I can't forget about the Detroit Lions. Did you guys know that they're huge Pokemon Pinball nerds? Thank you all for the gift of your good company throughout 2024 during this long pinball chapter. And then, of course, another major thanks is owed to Bandy for not only recommending this game in the first place, but for all the time and energy she's invested in wrangling this community of pinballers in the chat while I'm busy flopping multiple balls just trying to get back into the shop. It's also been great to see an entire community of Pokemon Pinball streamers pop up like Gord, Awesh, and HD Gaming, a guy who's aiming to break the world record for the highest score on the Sapphire board, 133 billion. My highest score ever was 11.6 billion, and even that took me almost 4 days of streams to pull off, so I'm good. I'll leave the leaderboards to you guys. I'm gonna stick to the speed choice speed runs, and if you want to join me, I stream here and on multiple platforms almost daily. And if you enjoyed this video and streams aren't really your thing and you want to directly support me in some other way, please consider joining my Patreon, where I'll be taking suggestions and discussing plans for future videos. We also have the Super Underground Discord, which is free to join if you want to keep tabs on what's going on and when. There's also some handy resources in there, like this incredible Pokedex tracker doc for Pokemon Pinball that was created by friend of the stream, Side Mitch. Links for everything will be in the description below. Go play Pokemon Pinball if you haven't already. Stream it if you can, I highly recommend it. And maybe if we're lucky, we can manifest an official sequel someday. Or maybe as a mini game in a future mainline Pokemon game? Bring back the game corners, maybe? But even if not, maybe we can just make one ourselves. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.